Hi.
Hello.
I think we are officially live. Hi, it's great to see you again.
Hi. Yes, we had a secret meeting earlier, but very recently. So I'm so
Yes.
excited to get to talk with you. I wish we were in person,
Oh
but
my
I'm so
God.
glad we can do this at least on the internet.
Yeah, I would, whenever it is physically possible, I would kill to actually have a conversation in a room with you. It would be so much fun. Um, quick introductions at the top, just for anybody who's joining us who may not be familiar with one or both of our work. Um, I'm Casey McQuiston. I am the author of queer romantic comedies Red, White, and Royal Blue, One Last Stop, and the upcoming I Kiss Shara Wheeler. And I am joined by one of my personal favorite authors, Malinda
Oh,
Lo, who I has too many wonderful books to name, but tonight specifically we are here to celebrate last night the Telegraph Club, which is the Barnes and Noble YA monthly pick for January, and also the
yay.
recipient of about 5 million awards, including the National Book Award, the Stonewall Medal, the Asian Pacific American Award for Literature. It's a Prince Honor Book, and a We Need Diverse Books, Walter Dean Myers Honor Book. And I just want to knock that out at the top of the hour, and I'm done
Oh,
embarrassing you.
I don't have all the
Yes.
stickers yet. I only have a
Oh,
few of them
oh my
so
God.
far.
Where are you going to put the rest?
Well, this is just my copy, so I'm just going to put them
Oh, yeah,
anywhere.
yeah,
That
yeah,
that question is for my publisher. Where
yeah,
they're
yeah.
going to put them.
Can't wait to see how they figure this one out. I've got the OG without any stickers because I did get it when it dropped.
Oh.
Uh, um, but yeah, I'm so excited. I've set my little timer so that we can go for about 40 minutes and then hop into some audience Q&A. So if you don't mind, I would love to dive in. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's go. Oh, I want to say hi to everyone from all around the world. Like, it's amazing. I've seen all your like locations go by.
Yeah,
That is so cool.
yeah. Yes, you are beloved by readers worldwide. I'd love to see it. So first of all, obviously, congrats on all of the honors that I just listed. How does it feel to watch this book get the reception that it has?
Oh my God, it's been amazing. It's been amazing. I used to feel kind of surreal about it, but now it's been out for a year and it just keeps going. And I feel like this book is no longer like my book. It's literally it's your book now. You know what I mean? It
Mhm.
belongs to everyone who reads it. So I feel like it's just keeps rolling because because
Yeah.
of the readers. So I'm so thrilled and happy that it's gotten such a wonderful reception. Like, I definitely did not imagine this when I started working on my historical novel set in San Francisco's Chinatown in the 1950s. Did not think it was going to get this kind of reception. So it's really
Yeah.
wonderful. It's
Yeah.
great.
It has been so much fun to watch, honestly. As a fan, I've enjoyed it. So I love that you brought up the incredibly specific time and place of this book, because that's my next question. This book has such a rich, specific sense of time and place. And I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, but I would love for you to tell us a bit about what drew you to this particular setting.
Yeah, so I lived in San Francisco for about 15 years, from like 2000 to 2015. So first of all, I love San Francisco. It's one of my favorite places in the world. Also, when I started working on this book, well, it started as a short story. So when I was thinking about the short story, I had been reading a book called Wide Open Town, which is a history of queer San Francisco. It's a fantastic scholarly history that really goes into super detail on the many lesbian bars in San Francisco in the 1940s and 50s. So I was reading that book, and I was also reading Rise of the Rocket Girls, which is about the women computers who worked at the Jet Propulsion Lab in the 40s and 50s. So these two books are not related, but in my head, they came together to create Lily. And she definitely lived in San Francisco, in Chinatown, and it was the 1950s, and she really wanted to be a rocket scientist like her Aunt Judy. So that's kind of the location really sprang out of the intersections of interests and identities that are in Lily. So it was like a character driven location decision.
I
And
love that.
yeah, and the time period, you know, I was just so amazed by how many lesbian bars there were in the 1950s, because today there are like,
there's probably less now.
I think there's one now, one, but there was a period in the 40s and 50s where there were like a rotating number of like dozens of bars. So it was just, it just seemed like an incredible time to be a lesbian in San Francisco. So, you know, I eventually narrowed down the year based on some details about Lily's family's immigration background and like local San Francisco history related to bar raids. That put it in 1954.
Yeah, I do feel like sometimes those like character driven decisions about like, you know, the framework of the story end up giving you like the best, most like immersive, organic setting. So I also want to talk about the Telegraph Club itself, which is sort of a setting within a setting, and such a I just really felt, to use a cliche, like transported into the club. I'm curious if there are things that you did that helped you inhabit that club beyond just what you read. Like, were there places that you went or anything like that, or even just like a drink that you made yourself at home that made you really able to get into that space?
Well, this is interesting because so I actually did go to some places, but in the course of research. So there's that. And then there were also places I went to when I was a lesbian in San Francisco, just living my life. Right. So like, because Wide Open Town had so many, it's such great details. I mean, it had the addresses of all these bars. Wow. And so I actually had moved away from San Francisco by the time I started working on this book, but I went back and I saw my friends and I made a list of a bunch of bars in that, the addresses, and I made a Google map and we went around to some of them. They're gone now, all except for one. But we walked around so I could get a feel of what it felt like to walk between them, like the locations, you know, and the city blocks. One of them is still there. It's not a lesbian bar anymore. It's just a dive bar. It's called Specs. And it's right off Columbus Avenue, across from Chinatown. And Specs is actually the original location of Tommy's 299 Club, which was raided in 1954. And so we went into Specs. You could actually see, so the Tommy's 299 was connected to another club upstairs that opened onto Broadway. It's like a weird geography on that block. But we went into, you can go into Specs now. I mean, I'm assuming they're still there. It's been there forever. And you can see in the back of the bar, there are these stairs that go up, and you can't go up the stairs. It's like blocked off.
Right.
But we went in there, we had a drink. It's like a very old divey bar with pictures on the walls. And they're very proud of being like a lesbian bar that was raided in the 1950s. Wow. So that was fun. And I walked around the neighborhood and looked in the windows of the places where the old lesbian bars used to be. Wow. But also, these are my friends with whom I used to go to a lot of lesbian bars.
That sounds like so much fun. So, I want to take the Malinda Lo lesbian bar walking tour of San Francisco.
It's so sad though, because there's like none left. But I remembered what it was like going out with my friends, and I feel like what's interesting about San Francisco is that the bars have changed, but they're in the same buildings that were there in the 1950s. So a lot of them are. So if you read Wide Open Town, the author really describes the physical feeling of those bars, and they're just like the ones I went to. Like, they all have the same entrance at the front where you walk by the long bar, so the bartender can keep an eye on who's coming in. Wow. And then you go to the back and there's like a slightly larger dance space or like performance space. And a lot of the places we went to had exactly that same layout, even in the 2000s. So I felt like I had actually been to some of these places. You know, they were different names and different people, different music, but same lesbian community, frankly, because we inherited those spaces from the women and queer women who were there in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. And so I really felt a very strong sense of connection with that time.
Wow, yeah, that's fascinating how like the architecture and the design of the place is kind of dictated by the needs of the people who are using it, and that at least remains.
Yep.
Wow, that's very cool. So I mean, there's so many, I feel like, specific things that you research for this, you know, everything from that to rocket science. But which like, first of all, authors who can do it all like that, really, like, because I really struggle with the science aspect of anything, so that's amazing. But one of the very specific kind of avenues of research that I imagine you going down is the research into the male impersonator scene of the 50s, which I've always been fascinated by. And I would love for you to tell me about some of that research that you did, and if there was anything that you learned that surprised you, or just, you know, what were some things that you learned?
Yeah, that was super fascinating to me because I did not know that it was a thing really in the 50s, and it was by the 50s it had kind of gone underground to queer clubs. So there were male impersonators, which would be drag kings, and there were female impersonators, drag queens. So in San Francisco, these impersonation shows were quite a big part of the tourist industry, and people would go to these bars to see, you know, exotic cultures that they were not part of. You know, straight people would go, but the queer community would go there too, because it was their community space. But what I found super fascinating was that before the 1950s, it was, at one point, it was extremely mainstream. Like in the 1890s, there were like very famous male impersonators, mostly from England, who toured the US and played in like massive theaters and had lots of fans, and they looked so good. Like they have a lot of they have merchandise. You can still buy it on eBay, and they look amazing. And I was just amazed by these performers, and it was also amazing to learn that most of them were straight. Like they were straight women who could lengthen their career on stage by, as they grew older, by playing men. It's fascinating. But then, like in the early 20th century, like homosexuality became like a medicalized thing. And so the gender bendingness of these male impersonators became attached to homosexuality. And at that point, it started to become more marginalized, because it wasn't okay to be gay. Like before, no one thought you were gay if you were doing this. But then as culture changed, it became attached to queerness. So it started to go underground. You know, there were clubs in Harlem in the 30s where you could see women performing in drag. And Hollywood really liked it still. Like Marlene Dietrich was big into that, right? It was a thing. It's not like it kept going, but it kind of continually moved further and further underground until by the 50s and 60s, it had become mostly shown in gay clubs. And then at some point, I don't know when, at some point it became drag. Like I don't know when it changed to become such a central part of queer culture, but at some point between the 50s and the late 70s, early 80s, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, first of all, I feel like I could listen to you talk about queer history all night. And if you ever decide to like moonlight as a queer history professor, please let me sign up for your class. But I really have to bring us over to Lily and Kath, because I just love them so much, and I would love to talk about them a bit with you. And you know, I think there's so much balance happening in this book between, you know, the first kiss scene it's like one of my favorite first kiss scenes I've ever read.
Spoiler alert, they have a kiss scene.
I'm so sorry. Okay, that's the only spoiler I'm going to give you guys tonight.
I'm pretty sure everyone here is aware of this.
I mean, honestly, I would be really mad at you if there was no kiss in this whole book, but and I think they would be too. But but there's a lot of balance going on between, like, there's like this really tenderness and sweetness to their relationship, and there's also, you know, this backdrop of, you know, so much that they're both dealing with, and this heaviness of their story. How do you go about like balancing those two sides and making sure that there is room for the sweetness and, you know, for holding enough space to like have that gravity of the story too?
Mm. Well, I think that it's just, I don't really think of it as holding a balance, really. I think of it as this is their real life, you know, and in real life, you have moments of gravity and you have moments of lightness, and they coexist. And sometimes they happen immediately, one after the other, and sometimes they build, you know. And I really just think of it as writing a story about Lily's life and things that happened to her. So I'm also very bad at post-analyzing what my decisions that I made, because I can't really remember a lot of the time. I worked on this book for like 3 years, so a lot of the time I thought it was I didn't think it was good. And actually in the first draft there was no kissing. They did not have a relationship. They didn't have a romantic relationship. They were, I mean, there was hints of it, but it didn't happen in the first draft. And it was after I finished the first draft that I realized, okay, I really have to just go there, because clearly they want to go there, and I should do that. So that came through in the second draft. It actually was very easy to put it in, because it was quite clear that that's what was going to happen.
Yeah. I love when characters tell you like, oh no, there's something going on here and you need to know about it.
It was weird. I think I was kind of resisting it for the entire first draft, and I'm not really sure why. I think maybe I felt like statistically it's unlikely that you're going to fall in love with the first girl you meet and it's going to work out. You know what I mean? But doesn't matter. It's a novel. So.
Yeah. And I kind of honestly, I love that for them, and I don't want to spoil any of the ending, but I really do love, because it feels like it rings really true for a lot of the queer people of that era, who just kind of like there. I feel like when you see the type of companionship and connection that grew out of that era, people who found each other and it was like, this is the person that I'm gonna like, this would be my life raft in this life. I feel like that just really tracks for them, and I love that. So as I know you just said that you're not great at craft questions, but I am going to ask you some craft questions.
Go ahead. I can answer some of them. Some of them I have no idea how I do it, but sometimes I know.
That's the whole thing, is like sometimes it's just like instinct. It's just like, oh well, it just felt right, and I don't know how I knew that.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
But one of the things that I really always love and notice about your work and find really like inspirational and aspirational is the amount of restraint that you have as a writer. And I am going to embarrass you by reading a really great line really quickly. This is like the first line that I highlighted when I was reading, which is
highlight.
No, I like to get in there with my highlighter sometimes.
I'm amazed.
So this is like the very last line of chapter 2, so it's an early line, so no spoilers. But like, she could feel it in her bones, a hot and restless urge to look, and by looking to know. And there's like the longest word in that sentence is like 8 letters, and it says so much, and such a short, concise. I mean, it's just amazing. So can you just talk about how you honed that skill, because it's such a difficult skill to master, of not overwriting and not wringing everything you can out of something, and just like putting a few words on a page and letting them sing. Is that something that you like consciously honed, and what do you think that brings to your storytelling?
Well, I remember that sentence. I sat there I write back there in an orange chair, and I remember working on that sentence for a while. Like, I sat there for a while looking at those words and figuring out how to make them have the rhythm and the feeling and the weight that I wanted. And when I found that combination of words, I remember thinking, that is it.
Yes.
I mean, sometimes it's clear when it works, and other times it's not. But that one was clear for me. I think what I do, well, there are 2 ways I go about doing this. One, I have a great editor named Andrew Carr. I don't know if look, he's right there. Oh, it's his favorite sentence in the book. I will say, and Andrew will go through my manuscript and just delete things.
Love that.
And over time, I have come to realize that when he deletes a sentence, it's often a sentence where I'm trying to hammer in the point. Okay. And I have realized, as he has done this over several books we've worked together, I realize I don't have to do that. I don't have to hammer in the point. And if you don't hammer in the point, in a way, it makes the writing more powerful for the reader, because they see the point in their head. So if they get the point themselves, then it's much more powerful than me telling them.
Yeah.
But you have to have the courage to believe in your reader to get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes I just want to be so sure that the reader gets it that I overwrite it. And then Andrew will come and delete it. But I have started to realize I don't have to do that, and I can trust the reader. I can have faith in the reader to understand it. And it might make the reader have to focus a little more, but if they have to focus a little more, then the book will be more impactful for them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the other thing I do is read writers that I admire. And I read them all the time. Like when I'm writing, I just reread their scenes that I like. You know?
Yeah.
And I sometimes I think people are worried that that means that they'll be copying another writer, but I feel like it's like filling the creative well. You know, I want to see how they do things with words so that I can maybe gain some of that skill myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's why I get in there with my highlighters, so I can do the same thing. Another craft question, and then I will let you off the craft hook. So, and this is kind of almost more of like a meta, like formatting question, but something I love is when an author kind of intersperses sort of like goodies throughout a book, where like this book, for example, has a lot of timelines and a lot of like, you know, footnotes and these elements, but specifically like the timelines and like sort of like the outside POV moments where we're really contextualizing Lily's story within like this greater history, and also like this interpersonal history. So can you talk us through, you know, how you decided to include those elements and what you wanted to get across to the reader with them, and how you developed them?
Yeah, so the timelines and the scenes that are from the perspectives of Lily's parents and her aunt, they came later in the process. I probably between the first and second, sometime in the second draft. And the scenes from her parents and her aunt were suggested by my editor. Because he thought it would be good to give readers a broader context for what was going on. And I thought that was great because I wanted readers to know why her parents eventually make the decisions they make at the end of the book. I wanted to give readers a sense of who they were as people. And Lily, the rest, most of the book is from Lily's point of view. So she doesn't know these things. And because she comes from a Chinese family, her parents aren't going to be telling her stuff. Like they don't tell her things about their lives. So she wouldn't know. So the only way would be for the reader to know is if I had those scenes from the adults' perspectives. And I think they do provide a bigger context for the reader. The timelines came in quite late in the process. I couldn't figure out how to signal to the reader that there was stuff happening. Like I also wanted to tell them about history. Right. There's a war here, like there's law that got passed. I wanted to tell them these things, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. And interestingly, I had been talking with Emily Danforth, who wrote The Miseducation of Cameron Post. I got her to read an early draft, and she was like, I don't understand what's happening here.
Can you fill me in?
Yeah, because the chapters had no delineation in time. So it was just confusing. And I realized that I needed to have a marker, and like I need to at least put a date. And once I put a date on the chapter, I realized, oh, I can have this timeline. And then I had this idea to make it look like a compass thing.
Yeah.
You know, so you're like spinning through time as a time travel aficionado, you know, this should be clear to you. So yeah, so once I had that idea about the timeline, that made sense to me. And then I put them in. So because I wanted to give the reader some guidelines, like this is when it's happening, and because they jump back and forth. So you don't want to, leave them totally confused.
No, but I love that. And it was like really grounding and orienting and like as a reader. And I also felt like I learned stuff. It's like a teaching text.
It was sneaky, wasn't it?
Yeah, I love
sneaking that info.
I do that too. I love to give people sneaky homework in a book. It's so much fun. So I guess this is kind of a craft question, but it's kind of bigger than that. So I thought that the use of different dialects like Mandarin and Cantonese, and then like sometimes dialects that Lily doesn't even speak or understand, being mentioned, and the way that some of the words are Romanized and some of them are not. Obviously these are all like really deliberate choices that you made that accomplish a lot in a storytelling level. Do you want to talk a bit about those choices and what you were looking to accomplish with that?
Sure. So I wanted to show that Lily is bilingual and lives in a community where they switch between languages often. So her family speaks a couple of different dialects of Chinese. Her mom speaks Cantonese, her dad speaks Shanghainese, and there are also people in her community who speak Mandarin, although not that many at this point in history.
Right.
So there are different dialects of Chinese happening, and they speak English. So I chose to put some of them in Chinese characters because I realized that Romanizing entire sentences just makes it unreadable for the English language reader. Like, you can't tell what is happening. The way that Chinese is Romanized in the 1950s, it's just looks like a bunch of nonsense. And I wanted it to be clear that they were speaking a language that has, history and meaning behind it. So when they're speaking fully in Chinese, I have the dialogue in Chinese characters. But when they're speaking like what I call it's Chinglish, you throw in some Chinese words in the middle of an English language sentence with your friend because you both know this one word for this other thing. When they do that, I romanize those singular Chinese words in the dialect that they're speaking.
Yeah.
So it was like a lot of complicated conversations with my parents.
Yeah.
And asking them to help me. And I really enjoyed doing that stuff because I did study Chinese in college. I'm not fluent anymore, sadly. You don't speak it every day, you just lose it. But I still really enjoyed getting into the language details there.
Yeah. Well, and it was such like on like even just a formatting level, it was just such a like effective creative storytelling tool of I loved it. It was and in the audio. And I have not listened to the audiobook yet, but I've heard that it really, really like makes the audiobook even more fun to listen to.
That's great. I know the actor who did the audiobook is so talented. I'm Emily Wu Zeller, and I'm so glad that she did it because she speaks all these dialects. So when we got her, that was very important to me that we got a voice actor who could speak all the different dialects of Chinese. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna buy Wide Open City. Is that what the book was called?
Wide Open Town.
Wide Open Town. I'm gonna buy Wide Open Town. I'm gonna listen to the audiobook. I have my to-do
You
list
have your
set.
homework.
Yeah. Listen, all I wanted was for you to give me homework. That's all I wanted when I logged in tonight.
I'm happy to deliver on that.
All right, back to my questions. Okay, so you are, I think before Telegraph Club, I primarily knew you as an author of fantasy and really beautiful fantasy. And I'm curious if there are things that you find challenging about switching between genres, with this obviously being not a fantasy. And if there are things that you like better about fantasy and things that you like better about, historical.
Weirdly, I feel like historical fiction is very close to fantasy because you're still doing world building. You're still trying to convince the reader that this world they're reading about is real. Because even though it's in the real world, like this is 2022 now, like we are not in the 1950s. And that was a very different time and place. So in a way, I feel like I used a lot of fantasy tools. Switching genres for me is like something I've always done. So maybe it would be easier if I stayed in one genre. Like I'm just harder for myself, I think, because every time I write a new book, it's in a new genre. So I have to like figure out how to do that. But I'm not sure if it's I'm not sure if I'm figuring out how to do a new genre or if I'm figuring out how to do a new book. You know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
every book is its own world and it has its
Yeah.
own problems. So I feel like switching the genres may not even be the biggest issue. It's finding my way into the new story and the new characters,
Yeah.
because at first I don't know anything about them and it's very hard and I hate writing the first draft.
It's so hard to like get like your emotional connection with your especially your POV character for me like in the first draft. Like I don't know who you are yet, kid, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It takes me like the entire first draft to figure
Yeah.
out who they are.
Yeah.
It's
Oh my
very
God.
annoying. I wish it happened better, like faster for me or something.
That reminds me, I wanted to circle back and ask you a question from something you mentioned earlier, which is the thought of this book, which is so to me like so detailed and like there's so much story there. The thought of this book starting as a short story is fascinating to me. And I'm so curious, like where did it begin and end originally? And what like, you know, when did you know like, oh man, this is a book?
Well, it was a short story, and basically the story was only about Lily discovering that lesbians exist. That's it. There's not that much you can do in a short story, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that's all it was, and it was my agent who was like, "No, this could be much bigger because when I would talk to him about the short story, I went on for a long time because I had over researched the short story."
Mm-hmm.
And he was right. I did have a lot more to say about Lily, and so that's when I decided to expand it into a novel. And it was just at first it's weird. I feel like the idea I had for the novel at the beginning is really very close to the novel that has
Mm-hmm.
happened, which
Yeah.
doesn't always happen. So but it wasn't easy. Like I was saying, I did research for like the first year because I knew nothing about the 1950s. So I learned while I was doing that research, I came to know a lot more about the story I wanted to tell, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I struggled through that, and then I struggled through writing the first draft, and eventually I got to a place where I thought it was pretty good. But it took me took me a while.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. Like it takes a long time to figure out what's happening for me in the
Well,
book.
kind of like thinking but about that and also what you were saying about how it's not so much about what genre is it going to be, but like what is the specific world. I feel like both of those things, yeah, it takes a long time to settle into it. And you almost have to like develop a whole like environment and like
Hmm.
fluency before you can even really dig into what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
You have to learn the language of the book that you're writing.
Yes. Yes. And you have to figure out how to connect emotionally with this kid you just made up.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know though. Lily, I found so easy to connect with
Oh,
emotionally.
that's great.
I I love her. Like I just I have a lot of feelings about her and all of the pockets of her skirts and everything. Her. Um so I feel like when I think about like authors who paved the way, as we like to say, in queer YA, I mean, you're like top of the list for me personally. Like
Oh, thank you.
I feel like you paved the way. And I would just love to hear you tell us a bit about what it was like writing queer and specifically lesbian young adult books. You know, Ash came out in 2009, and I feel like that was such a, I mean, just a kind of a game changer. So what was that like? You know, whether you want to talk about writing or selling it or whatever, what was that experience like for you?
Well, in terms of writing it, I didn't. I had to have the courage to write it because when I
Mhm.
realized it was like the first draft of Ash was also straight. I mean, it wasn't. It was straight. So it was like
Wow.
a friend of mine who read it and it was like, Ash has no chemistry with the prince. She really likes this
This is a
lady.
lesbian.
Yeah. So I thought that was like a bonkers idea because I had
Mhm.
never read a lesbian Cinderella and I thought there was no way I could get it published.
Mhm.
So this is like 2006. So I had to convince myself that I should do it, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
So I did. And once I convinced myself that I should do it, I did it. and there was absolutely no pushback from the publisher. Like the book went to auction, 5 publishers wanted to publish Ash, which
Wow.
is quite shocking. I didn't know it was an auction. I was like, didn't know anything,
Oh,
but
okay,
it
you were a
was,
baby.
I didn't know anything. So it was published by Little Brown Books for Young Readers, and they really pushed it hard, and it did quite well. It received so much love from the very beginning, Ashton.
Mhm.
I think people were like starved for that kind of book, you
Yeah.
know, like because I think some people hadn't imagined that it was possible.
Mhm.
Just like me, I
Yeah.
hadn't imagined that it was possible. I
Mhm.
subconsciously wrote it.
Yeah.
So that was really wonderful. The big thing that has changed from back then to now is that when Ash came out, when I did events, I almost always had to come out at the event.
Mhm.
I was
Mhm.
pretty much always the only gay person there. I was definitely the only Asian lesbian.
Mhm.
And so that was always a little bit weird for me. Like I was out, I wrote for LGBT media, I was on the internet as an out lesbian, but it's still different coming out in a room full of strangers in
Yeah.
Texas.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
that's a different experience. So
uh-huh.
it was a little bit it was a little nerve-wracking for me back then to do this.
Mhm. Mhm.
But now that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
Now there's plenty of queer authors at events, if we have them in person. So
Yeah.
it's like night and day when it comes to
Wow.
that part of it.
Yeah. Well, thank God for that.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that like it is so energizing to be in that room and be like making like a gay inside joke and have people laugh at it.
Yeah,
That
that's great.
is, it's what a wonderful feeling, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's
Yeah.
totally a miracle. You know, I
Yeah.
never 10 years ago would not have happened.
Yeah. Incredible. Okay, so I have like 3 minutes left before we go to Q&A. And so I'm going to ask you this question that is just purely indulgent for me. If Lily and Kath were teenagers in 2022, what do you think they might be like, and how do you think they might meet?
Well, first of all, they would not be the only girls in math class. And I do think they would have come out earlier. Like I mean, Kath already knew that she was gay.
Yeah.
I think she would have. I think their coming out experiences would have happened younger.
Mhm.
And I do like to think they still would have met in math class,
Yes.
and they probably did a project together. And don't you think? I mean, I bet that's how they get together, because
Oh my
if they're
God.
still in high school together and I mean that makes sense to me. They can't sneak into a lesbian bar because
Yeah.
there aren't any.
Yeah.
And now we have photo IDs, so you
That's true.
can't. It's much harder to get a fake ID now.
Yeah.
Like in the 50s, it was just like black and white text printed on a card. Easy.
Honor
So
system.
yeah, they could have gone to like the queer cult, their local queer center, their queer youth center. They'd
Yeah.
probably go to prom together, right? This makes sense to me.
Yes. Oh, yes. And like a tux and a gown.
Yeah,
Yes. Love that.
absolutely.
I love the idea of them of like, instead of, I just picture them like gazing at each other over like some graph paper, and they're like doing some very complicated calculations. And it's like there's actually something so romantic. And one thing I think that like really works for them is like I enjoy opposite attract stories, but when it's two people who have the same like really niche interests, and they
Yeah.
like, I could see them both just being like, oh, you know how to do that? I know how to do that. You know how to do that equation? I love it. I love it. Okay, yeah. So Kath and Lily at prom. That's what I'm gonna take away from this. That's gonna be my happy place. All right. I am gonna hop over to, let me pull up our questions for the Q&A. And I'm just gonna like try to pick some randomly.
You guys sent a lot of questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We can randomly select some, maybe.
Okay. So this is from Carolyn, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Lahorgiu, or maybe Lahorge. And they would like to know, and this is sort of a great time to also ask you about. They're asking what would your next book be about, which I believe is a great opportunity to ask you about this recently announced companion novel for last night at the Telegraph Club. So tell us about that.
Yeah, it's called A Scatter of Light. It's coming out this fall, so you don't have to wait too long. Actually, if you get the paperback, there's a sample chapter. There's like a teaser chapter from it in the back. Yeah, trust me, it's in the back. And it is a companion novel because there will be some characters from Telegraph Club who show up in A Scatter of Light, but warning you, it is set 60 years later in 2013. So you can do the math, right? It's quite a bit later. So people will be older.
Yes.
And it's a very different book. So it's not a romance in the way that Telegraph Club is. It is about art and self-discovery. It is set in Northern California, in mostly in Marin County in 2013. It's about an 18-year-old girl named Aria who spends the summer there with her grandmother, who is an artist. And she meets her grandmother's gardener, who is a woman, and she thinks this lady is very hot, but I'm straight.
Don't we all think that at some point?
So exactly. So that's A Scatter of Light. It's coming out this fall.
Love that. Okay, let's see. I'm trying. There's so many and they're all so good. I'm narrowing down. Okay, so Justice Simonek would like to know, do you have any words of encouragement to authors who are struggling to have their books featuring queer and POC main characters reach the level of recognition gained by straight white books?
Well, I think that it's a lot easier now because there are way more of us and publishing is much more open. I mean, look at Casey. I mean, your books have been like an amazing, incredible success right out of the gate. It's like incredible, right?
Thank you.
This is just, it's congratulations. I mean, it's amazing. It's just, so first of all, you can have so much more hope that this can happen now. It's just a totally different time. And I just encourage writers everywhere to focus on your craft first. You know, you want to put your best work out there when you're going on submission. And that is the best way you can pave the way for your own future success, to really put in the time working on your craft and your storytelling. So I definitely encourage people to, you know, find a critique partner if you can. If you have access to taking a writing workshop somewhere, like at your school or at like a local writing group or community, do that. It's just wonderful to get feedback on your work from other writers and to kind of get in the mindset of revision, because revision is how you put out your best work. You know, I think that it can be really daunting to revise your work, but that's how you make it, that thing in your head, that's how you make it perfect, or as close to perfect as you can, right? Through revision.
Yeah. All right. So REB wants to ask, what was the most fun part of writing this book?
The most fun part was definitely, I think, writing the Telegraph Club scenes. I loved writing the scenes where she goes to the bar. They were just so fun for me because I got to, you know, call on my own experience. And I really love describing the bathroom in the bar. I don't really know why. I had to cut a lot of that out because it was not necessary for me to go into all the stuff written on the walls. So I really enjoyed it though. That was fun. Yeah, the research for that was fun and writing it was fun. It was great.
We need the director's cut with all the bathroom graffiti.
No, you really don't need it. It's not.
I want it. All right, let's see. Okay. Would you, Brianna is asking, would you write any more queer historical fiction?
I love writing historical fiction. I hope so. I don't know at this point because I keep switching genres. So once I run out of genres, I'll go back to historical. I really did like writing historical fiction. I feel like it kind of spoke to so many nerdy parts of me. And so hopefully hopefully I will.
Ugh, I can't wait to read it. Deborah Burke wants to know, how does the time frame of this book relate to what's happening today?
Oh, well, that's something, you know, when I first started working on this book, it was early 2017, which was the beginning of the Trump administration,
Oh
a
boy.
dark time.
Yeah.
And it felt like a lot of the things that were happening in the book, like the immigration issues,
Mhm.
the anti-communism fervor, all of that felt weirdly paralleled to early Trump administration time. And
Yeah,
then as
yeah,
the years passed and we got further into the darkest timeline, the parallels just kept coming.
yeah.
Like they didn't stop. So I think that if you are paying attention to the news, it's quite clear. Like we still have a lot of anti-Asian racism happening. We still are very anti-immigrant in many ways. Not me personally, but the United States.
Mhm.
And it's this stuff just keeps happening. It's really unfortunate, and I wish people would learn from history, but it doesn't
Yeah.
seem that we really do that very
Yeah.
well.
I was thinking about that when I was putting together my questions. I was like, should I ask about like the Red Scare and like our current surveillance state and
Exactly.
conspiracy theorists? And
There's one that right there. Yeah, it just
yeah,
continues. It just
yeah,
continues.
yeah. Then I decided I didn't want to make myself too depressed tonight. So I was like, maybe. All right. Where do you see, okay, sorry, this is from Rosario Santiago, who would like to know, where do you see Lily sitting with other queer Chinese characters in popular culture, such as Ellie Chu from The Half of It or Jane from One Last Stop?
Oh, well, I was just gonna say, before I got on here, I was thinking about Jane from One Last
Mm.
Stop, because when was Jane born? Like
She was born in
1950,
53. So she's
53. So
53.
yeah, so she's a bit younger than
Yeah.
Lily, but her parents own a Chinese restaurant, right?
Yes. Mhm.
So it occurred to me that probably Jane Sue's parents' Chinese restaurant is in direct competition with Shirley's parents' Chinese restaurant.
They've got
So
beef.
they do, they're in direct competition. So Lily may have encountered Jane as a baby at some local Chinese, Chinatown events.
Mhm.
I'm sure that Shirley's family knows about Jane's family.
Oh yeah. They've definitely like talked some trash about
Yeah,
James. Family.
so I'm sure they have run into each other at various
I
times.
didn't even think about
Absolutely.
I didn't even think about like the element of competing restaurants. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, also like within pop culture, I just I think that like you were saying, so often you were the only Asian lesbian in a room. And I love the idea of Lily becoming part of the canon,
Mm. I
part of
hope she does. I hope she does. So that
I
would
think
be
she
great.
is. I think she is already. Uh
Wonderful. That's awesome.
yeah. Okay, let's see. Okay, so this person's name is Elizabeth Sorensen, and they want to know if there are any debut books coming that you are excited about or would recommend that you've read lately.
Yes, there. I always try to prepare myself now because I used to never be prepared for this stuff.
Yeah.
So this book just came out, Spin Me Right
Oh,
Round by David Valdez. It is a gay time travel romantic comedy. So
I'm
let me
here.
tell
I'm
you,
here for it.
exactly. It's like right up your alley. So it's
Yeah.
about this Cuban American gay boy who kind of does a Back to the Future thing. He goes back to the 80s and encounters his
Mhm.
parents.
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's so much fun. I really recommend it. And this is technically this is an adult debut. Marie
Mhm.
Rutkowski's Real Easy. This is a crime novel.
Mm.
Marie has written a bunch of YA books, but this is her first adult novel, and it is so incredibly tense and thrilling, and it's also very queer, and it's about these women who work at a strip club in the 1990s, and a murder, because
Mhm.
it is crime. It's so good. So highly recommend this too.
Oh my God, amazing. All right, I think, oh wait, I'm gonna recommend a debut too. I just finished reading Dead Collections by Isaac Fellman, which is I don't have a copy of it, but it is about a trans guy who is an archivist in San Francisco. So we're right back here with San Francisco queer history. And he is also a vampire. And
Oh,
so
great.
he like lives in the archives because it's underground. And he meets the wife of like the recently deceased showrunner of his favorite show from the 90s, back when he was still alive. And she's like coming to donate her wife's papers to the archive, and of course they fall in love, and it's all very gender, it's very queer. There's so much about like being gay and like loving TV shows and like loving fiction. It was great. I had a wonderful time with it, and it's a debut. So, well, no, it's not
What's
a
it
debut.
called again?
Dead Collections by Isaac Fellman.
Okay.
It's not technically a debut, but it is the first book that Isaac is publishing under his like actual name rather than his dead name. So it counts as to me, I'm like, this is a debut.
We can all have many debuts in our lives. There's more than one.
So many ways to debut.
Just like we come out way more than one time.
So many times. So, yeah. Okay. All right. We are right at 7:55, so I'm gonna try and pick one last question, and then we'll wrap this up. So okay, let us see. Okay. So this is a tried and true question, and I love it. I love asking anyone about it. What is your advice to young queer people?
Oh, I think that what I would tell, now that I'm an old queer person, I would say to young queer people, understand that identities change during your life. You might feel very strongly that you identify as one thing when you're 18, and when you're 26, you might decide that doesn't fit me anymore, because when I was 18, I thought I was straight, and that did not end up lasting, and so things change during your life. And I think that I want people to remember that, and that flexibility and fluidity is far more the norm than like concrete self.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's the whole point of being queer, is that we don't have to be static, Yeah, I love that. That's a great note for us to end on. Do you have anything else that you want to say to this incredible crowd who has come to hear you talk about your book?
Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. And yes, don't forget, you can get this book at Barnes & Noble.
Yes, it is it is the Barnes & Noble monthly pick for January.
Yes. So it should be at your local B&N.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much, Malinda. This was so much fun. What a dream to get to talk to you about this book.
And likewise, thank you so much for your wonderful questions, and for moderating that large spreadsheet of questions. I'm so happy we got a chance to talk, and I hope we get to meet sometime.
For sure.
In person.
For sure. Yeah, I would love that. All right. Thank y'all so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.